Alright. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to do some talking about the Buddha. Yes, in this chapter 101, one of those gurus that came to Joseph's garden with Berekyah, the Buddhist monk. He's about to tell us all about the Buddha and the story that was handed down to him. Like Joseph's been telling us, there's a Nasarean variety to a lot of this stuff, and so we're going to hear the Nasarean variety on the story of right now. I just wanted to do a little bit of recap. So these three gurus arrived in Joseph's garden the day before a great Sabbath, and this was the 7th Sabbath of that year, so it was the final great Sabbath, and a lot of esoteric hidden teachings are in this scroll. He also said that these two gurus that traveled with Berekyah were known to be amongst the most respected scholars, yogis, and martial artists of their generation. That's why their behavior, hanging out with a female of another religion at that, was overlooked because of these monks' reputation. But these two monks were considered to be unorthodox. Let's get going. Samana Dharma is the one who shares about the Buddha and Buddhist teachings. We're going to start in 420, but it's so long I'm going to skip around, okay? Siddhartha Gotama, and in the Megillah his name is spelled Gotama, but I'm going to pronounce it the way it's written in the Holy Megillah Nasarean Bible of the Essene Way. You have it as Gotama Buddha, and it does say here the word Buddha is a title that recognizes his high level of enlightenment. So Buddha means enlightened one, okay? So the man that came to be known as Buddha was born with the name Siddhartha Gotama. His family's name was Siddhartha. His personal name was Gotama. Okay? So, it says, after an appropriate period of contemplation, the next to speak was Samana Dharma. He looked at young Yahshua and asked, "Have you heard very much about the founder of the Buddhist path, Gotama, the Buddha?" Yahshua replied, "I have heard of him, but would like to know more." Samana Dharma said to the group, "Well, my main talk will be on Buddha's teachings, on the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path of Enlightenment, but for the sake of young Yahshua, I will begin by telling a short version of the life of Gotama Buddha." He says, "The following account is what was taught to me. Because this account describes events that happened hundreds of years ago, I was not there to witness the factualness of every detail. Even so, this is what has been passed down for many generations, and I now will share it with you. According to the tradition handed down to me, Gotama lived about 500 years ago. Because he was born into a family that was part of a clan called the Sakya, Gotama Buddha is also called Sakya Muni, the venerable wise man of the Sakya clan. In the region where Gotama was born, his father was the regional chief, not quite the same as what you would call a king, but similar. And so, Gotama was similar to what you would call a prince. His family was extremely wealthy, and Prince Gotama, raised in a palace, was groomed for a future of worldly power. Tradition tells us that at the birth of Gotama, a fortune teller, perhaps we should say a prophet, since the words came true, told the baby's father the following prediction, now known as the 4 passing sights. The fortune teller said that the baby was destined for greatness, but that the greatness could be expressed in 2 different ways. Either Prince Gotama would, if he remained on the path of worldly power, conquer all of India and become the most powerful king ever, or would abandon the path of worldly power and become a great spiritual teacher. Gotama's father quickly summoned 2 other fortune tellers, and separately each told him the same thing. Being a worldly man, his father had no desire for his son to become a spiritual teacher. He preferred the other option. He desired that Gotama conquer all of India and become the most powerful king in history. Gotama's father called back the first fortune teller and said, "What must I do to assure that Prince Siddhartha Gotama becomes King Siddhartha Gotama? How can I assure that he does not abandon the path of worldly power to become a spiritual teacher?" The fortune teller replied, "You can only do what you can do. The ultimate choice will be his. What you can do to increase the likelihood that he will not renounce his worldly path for the spiritual path is as follows. You can try to prevent him from seeing 4 things that might shock him so that he quits the worldly path. Those 4 things are: 1. An extremely old person covered with ugly wrinkles who is near the age of death. 2. An extremely diseased person on the verge of death, regardless of age. And 3. A corpse. And number 4, a wandering monk dedicated to the spiritual path. As tradition has it, Gotama's father made a great effort to shower his son with the blessings of wealth and sensual pleasures, and also to prevent him from seeing any of the 4 passing sights just described. We are told that young Prince Gotama was provided a different palace for each season, the richest clothing, the finest foods. Now, I find none of those things hard to believe, but tradition also informs us that his father put 40,000 young women at Gotama's call for sexual pleasures. As much as I respect tradition, that number seems rather high. Perhaps it simply means that in the region under their control there was about 40,000 young women, and Gotama could legally call any of them to his bed for a night, then send them home. Regardless of the exact number, Gotama was clearly provided with an abundance of sensual pleasures, and to the best of his father's ability was denied the sight of those 4 items that I listed. 1. An extremely old person covered with ugly wrinkles who is near the age of death. 2. An extremely diseased person on the verge of death, regardless of age. 3. A corpse. And 4. A wandering monk dedicated to the spiritual path. If you think about it, this means that Gotama's father must have kept extremely elderly persons away from each of the 3 palaces that had been put at Gotama's service. But again, if you think about it, it would have been very hard to prevent him from ever seeing those 4 things. Sure enough, tradition informs us that Prince Gotama did end up seeing those things, and as the fortune teller had predicted, after seeing the 4th thing on that list, the wandering monk, he did abandon the worldly path for the spiritual path, for he experienced a great shock when he realized that he himself would grow old, frail, and eventually die. Tradition tells us that he abandoned his wife and child and the princehood to follow a wandering monk of an extremely aesthetic variety called strivers. That account is as follows. Tradition informs us that at first, and for some years, Gotama studied and practiced with ascetics called strivers. Many of these strivers were called sky-clad because their asceticism included wearing no clothes, not even in the winter. That's like that Wim Hof guy, right? Be out there in the snow, just not even shivering. Well, this says he was attracted to their extreme self-denial and ascetic disciplines, but over time felt so uncentered and unhealthy that he began to question the efficacy of excessive asceticism. Legend described a particular aha moment while he sat beneath a tree in meditation. In brief, having in the first portion of his life lived too luxuriously, too materialistically, then having gone to the opposite extreme by getting overly ascetic, Gotama realized that the middle path in regards to lifestyle and spiritual practice was more effective than being out of balance in either extreme direction. His philosophy of the middle path for monks is more aesthetic than the plan for the general population, but not so extreme as to be unhealthy or unhappy. The result of Gotama's enlightenment experience was his advocacy of the general principle of a balanced middle path between extreme asceticism and extreme materialism, that path being expressed by the following of 2 key sets of principles. 1. The Four Noble Truths, and 2. The Eightfold Path of Enlightenment. It says the Eightfold Path is intended to be a wise response to the Four Noble Truths. I will first share the Four Noble Truths, then the Eightfold Path, and information on various stages of Samadhi. These are Buddha's Four Noble Truths. Wow, it's funny because there was those 4 things that he was supposed to not see. I wonder if they match. We'll see. I'm going to do a little reading and then I'll be back. So verse 472 is where Samana Dharma recited the Four Noble Truths. Okay, and it's the whole verse. I mean, all 4 truths are in this one verse in the Holy Megillah. And this matches up here what it says. There's a few words that I would say are different than the Nasarean variety, so pay close attention. I'm not going to read off of Wikipedia. I'm going to be reading out of the Megillah, but you can do the side by side in your mind. The first noble truth is Buddha's realization that all is transient. Each life form will age and die, and thus natural life ends in pain and sorrow as you watch. Not only yourself, but also everyone you love decay and die. Thus, material life brings suffering upon this realization of its inherently transient nature. So it does seem like it's those 4 things that he wasn't supposed to see come out to be these 4 noble truths. Okay, so the first one is this inherently transient nature. The second noble truth is Buddha's realization that the cause of the great suffering linked to the first noble truth is our attachment, our clinging to, our desire to maintain things that are transient, things that decay and die. So our attachment is the second noble truth. And then the third noble truth is Buddha's realization that the end of suffering only comes by non-attachment to things that are transient and will decay and die. So the third noble truth is non-attachment. Pretty nice. And it says the fourth noble truth is Buddha's realization that the non-attachment that leads to liberation from the suffering inherent in clinging to things that are transient is more likely to be attained by a middle path of spiritual disciplines rather than extreme ecstatic practices, and the Eightfold Path is Buddha's articulation of such a middle path. Okay, so it looks like the fourth noble truth is the middle path. Alright, I like that. Now next comes Samana Dharma gives Buddha's Eightfold Path, and I'm going to read pretty fast through that, but forgive me. So here we go. Again, I'm reading out of the Holy Megillah, so it's a little bit different. Listen for the twist. Verse 473. Samana Dharma recited Buddha's Eightfold Path of Enlightenment as follows. The first of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right understanding, seeing life as it actually is according to the Four Noble Truths and the other foundational teachings of Buddha. The second of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right thought, wholesome, helpful thoughts that aid one's ability to follow the Eightfold Path, and the letting go of unhelpful thoughts and the associated unhelpful feelings. The third of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right speech, the speaking of wholesome, helpful words that aid oneself and others to follow the Eightfold Path, and restraint from the speaking of harmful, inappropriate words. The fourth and the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right action, performing appropriate actions in harmony with the principle of ahimsa and the other aspects of what Berekyah calls the yamas and niyamas, which include the restraint from harmful actions to the degree that your circumstances and stages of development permit. The fifth and 8th part of the Eightfold Path is called right livelihood, getting what you need to maintain your life without violating the Eightfold Path in the process. The sixth of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right effort. Since we exert effort as human beings, we should apply as much effort as necessary to be successful in each part of the Eightfold Path. The 7th part of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right mindfulness, an ongoing practice of being the watcher of the activities of your own mind, noticing its fluctuations and impulses, noticing its motivations and activities so as to apply the appropriate responses in a timely manner. The 8th of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path is called right concentration, appropriate meditation that progresses in the context of prolonged practice of all the aspects of the Eightfold Path and eventually leads in progressively deeper levels of samadhi that culminate in nirvana. So here we have nirvana, and I was playing around with my accent and I said, dang, you could say nirvana. And then I thought about Vanna White, and then the word and then the TV show Wheel of Fortune started chiming in my head, and yes, it does. It really does connect, guys. This TV show that's been on for 50-something years, Wheel of Fortune, does connect to the story that we just read about the Buddha, because it was fortune tellers. Remember that his father, Gotama's father, was talking to was some fortune tellers. So this TV show is a program, and it's not just by happenstance created by Merv Griffin. It was to replace some of these noble truths. It's really taken a lot from the story if you think about it. These word puzzles are like blank, and so it's something you can't see. I could go on for a few minutes about the similarities between this story and this program, TV show, but they're stealing, and Vanna White, I don't know if that's her real name, and it really doesn't even matter if it isn't her real name. Vanna White is what nirvana is talking about. It says the Buddhist concept of nirvana is the abandonment of the 10 fetters, making the end of rebirth and stilling the fires that keep the process of rebirth going. So the wheel of fortune, if you saw the last thing we read, it was talking about the Eightfold Path, and that is symbolized as a wheel. Yeah, this is how they replace the noble truths, by creating programs with similar sounding frequencies and replacing what our soul is telling us all the time. So very clever. And we got one more part to read from Samana Dharma. It's the stages of Buddhist samadhi, and there are 3 of those. So let's go. Alright. Samana Dharma describes the stages of Buddhist samadhi that culminate in nirvana. The first stage of Buddhist samadhi is the intermittent experience of joyful unitive consciousness, often in the context of peak experiences in meditation, and is linked to holy thoughts. The second stage of Buddhist samadhi is characterized by less thoughts running through the mind and more of a wordless, sustained, and joyful communion with the all, even in daily activities. The third stage of Buddhist samadhi is characterized by a gradual withdrawal from human concerns and eventually from your incarnation itself. Rather than being characterized by a conscious awareness of joy or bliss, as are the first 2 stages, this stage is characterized by a peaceful calm of silent equanimity that is closer to simply being than it is to participating. You become more of a detached watcher than a participating doer, have less personal motives, thoughts, or even feelings. Even so, there is still some awareness of being an incarnated soul, but the individual dharma is so fused with the universal dharma in such a high degree of unity that the sense of separation is very slight. The third stage of Buddhist samadhi may take many incarnations to attain. Once attained, whether in human incarnation or in some sort of higher angelic incarnation in some heavenly realm, or while disembodied, the third stage is followed by nirvana. At that point, one is off the wheel of birth and death, never to incarnate again. The thirst for existence as an individual being is gone. What is replaced by nirvana, according to Buddha, is not describable. Man. Samana Dharma continued his discourse, saying, I have a confession to make before going any further. Although I have accurately described the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path of Enlightenment, and the stages of Samadhi that culminate in Nirvana, I have done so in a language that is a bit closer to Nasarean teachings, precisely because of my long association with Berekyah and our many long conversations have convinced me that her understanding of certain things is actually superior to that of what, for lack of a better term, I will call fundamentalist Buddhism. Although my wording of the Buddhist teachings that I have given you is accurate, my fundamentalist Buddhist brethren would no doubt scold me for softening our usual emphasis on the condemnation of physically incarnated life, or even life in heavenly angelic abodes. Fundamentalist Buddhists strongly deny that an incarnation on a violent world such as this can be anything except horrible suffering. They also assert that even incarnations in heavenly abodes are pointless, in that they simply delay the return to a completely egoless, completely no self, completely lifeless, completely existenceless form of nirvana that is, in their view, the only permanent relief from suffering in the realms of illusion and impermanence. So Samana Dharma smiled at Berekyah and said, due to my contamination by Berekyah and her Nasarean ideas. It's so funny. The reason why I laughed is because I'm watching the Chosen series right now. It's like on Prime. And it's the whole Jesus and the disciples and everything. And it's showing how Rome was looking at it, how the Sanhedrin were looking at it, and the Pharisees. And that's what they were saying Jesus was doing to the people. He was contaminating them with his teachings. So it's funny. And they did call him Nazarene in there. And so that's why I laughed. Yeah. But he says, due to my contamination by Berekyah and her Nasarean ideas, I have come to believe that the universe, that is the source of planetary life and heavenly realms of existence inhabited by souls, must have been created for a good purpose. And though there certainly is suffering in the world, suffering itself can be an impetus to good things. Unlike most of my Buddhist monk brethren, I do not see this world as only an ocean of sorrow or inescapable suffering. I see it more like the Nazareans do, as one level in the cosmic school system. I see plenty of suffering, yet I also see what Berekyah calls spiritual evolution. I transcend the suffering around me by not ceasing to exist as a being, but by interpreting the suffering in the context of spiritual evolution on the spiral ladder of being. We're in verse 494. Okay, listen closely here. He is really about to dig in. He says, unlike my fundamentalist brethren, I feel free to interpret the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of Enlightenment within the context of my own spiritual realizations. For example, even though I fully understand that fundamentalist Buddhism does not believe in the eternal bliss as a soul in self-awareness, Buddhism believes it's better to cease to exist as an individual self-aware spiritual entity. Samana Dharma says here that I must be true to what I have realized, experienced, intuited, and truly believe. I feel completely free to be a Buddhist with my own non-fundamentalist interpretations of some things, and I believe that it is what Gotama would want me to do. So I have given you an accurate account of the main Buddhist doctrines, but in a somewhat sunnier manner than would my brother. So today is the solstice too, and I just realized that that's probably why it's hard to make this video, because the energy is tough. I was yelling on the mic earlier. So this is like remake number 5 or 6 now. Okay, so let's keep going though. We're almost done. We're like, well, basically we're halfway through. So I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but we're halfway through. He says, what I add to the Buddhist articulation of the levels of samadhi is, simply put, another level that is even more transcendental than the Buddhist notion of nirvana. Based on my own realizations, after Buddha's nirvana level of samadhi, there is a next level that I call bhakti samadhi. I once gave up having to be an individual self, entered nirvana, and found my eternal existence as an individual self handed back to me as a gift of grace. He says, it turns out that the Megillah is the most accurate scripture, and that it is absolutely correct that love is the highest power. When I gave up being an individual self, I realized that I still am. And he says, and that am is Sat, which is existence. And I experienced also that I could only be realizing that because I am conscious of my awareness. He says, and realizing myself as both existence, which is Sat in the Sanskrit, and consciousness is Chit. I blissfully realize that bliss is the most evolved, most powerful, most eternal, most real aspect of that which I am. He says in verse 503, I am Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And Ananda is the divine heart of compassion that I call Karuna. Karuna is the universal love that is the highest bliss. And I just want to say that it's spelled Karuna. It almost sounds like Corona, right? But no, life's a beach, right? Here it's Karuna, and that is universal love. And remember, in the video where Mary was singing her chant, she said it is universal compassion. Deeply I feel Karuna. Yeah, no, it's not the Corona. Karuna. Wow, it's so funny too how close that word is to something else we heard out here, right? But anyhow, Karuna is the universal love that is the highest bliss. Divine love is the ultimate power that trumps empty existence by filling it with the countless manifestations of love. Love is the ultimate nature of the all that I am and you are. That is why Bhakti Yoga is the heart of yoga, and that in the words of the greatest yogini, or yogi that I have ever met. Berekyah, Bhakti Yoga is the motivational context in which we practice all of the other yogas. What I just said is not really in conflict with Buddha's levels of samadhi, because as I told you, he simply chose not to speculate on what sort of state of existence or non-existence might follow nirvana. That might be because he did not go beyond that point. It is possible that he went way beyond most human beings in world history and yet did not reach that fourth level of samadhi, what I am calling Bhakti Samadhi. There is one piece of evidence that this might be the case. That is the account of how he died. It is said that he died after eating a rotten serving of pork that was placed in his begging bowl. Evidently, though Buddha was opposed to killing animals for meat, if people put meat in his begging bowl, he would eat it. Not only did that decision eventually kill his body, but it may have prevented him from fully entering the highest degree of love consciousness that is only had in human form by those that eat no meat. I am just sharing my opinion. Nobody needs to adopt my viewpoint unless they choose. I will now culminate my discourse by sharing a teaching of Gotama Buddha on how the mind can be related to a garden. I will then describe what I call mental gardening. Buddha said, the mind flits here and there, entertains one thing, then zips to another. It is difficult to train your mind to focus on what is most appropriate in a given moment. Although difficult, set your mind to the task. For a mind that is trained to focus on what is appropriate in each given moment, that mind is like a well-tended garden, free of weeds. Like a productive garden, that mind is a joy to behold. Blessed are the words of Gotama Buddha. Let us each consider that our mind is like a garden. Let us practice mental gardening by pulling the weeds and planting good seeds. Young Yahshua, do you understand what I mean by the term mental garden? Yes, Venerable Samana, I believe I do. For example, if I notice an ignoble thought, I can consider it to be like a weed in my mind. I can pull it out, also in the manner that the wind carries with it seeds, good and bad, to land upon the tilled soil of the garden. So do the winds of life bring to my mind both good thoughts and bad. Just as the farmer will seek to prevent bad seeds from entering his soil, and if he notices that they have not taken root, will pull them while small, so are we well advised to do likewise with the soil of our mind. We should make an effort to avoid the entry of bad seed into our garden mind, and when we do notice that a mental weed has taken root, pull it out while small before it spreads and takes over the garden. This is direct contrast to the parable of the wheat and the tares when he said, let them grow together until the harvest. Remember? I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you are, you know what I'm talking about. It says here, but a garden is not only about discouraging the entry and rooting of weed seeds. It also is about encouraging the planting and development of the intended seeds. We do that by feeding and watering the seeds. Likewise, in the garden of our mind, we should not only pull out the weed thoughts, starting with the most poisonous ones, but should encourage the planting and growth of positive thoughts. We do that, as both Berekyah in her Yoga Sutras and you, Venerable Samana, in your description of the Eightfold Path of Gotama Buddha make clear by yoga disciplines such as the yamas and the niyamas. In the garden where we seven now sit in circle, tools are used. In the garden of our mind, the tools are the yamas and niyamas and related spiritual practices. Lately I have been practicing a form of meditation taught to me by my father Joseph. He has taught me many forms of meditation. I share the following one because it relates directly to the topic at hand. It is called Gatekeeper Practice. For the duration of that practice, consider that your mind is a holy palace, and you are the guard at the door. When an inappropriate thought seeks entry to the palace, send it away. Likewise, when you notice a previous admitted guess of thought or belief or opinion that has become unruly or been revealed to be an unpleasant or harmful guest, send it away. Samana Dharma smiled and said, "Well said, young Yahshua. You may be young in body, but not in spiritual wisdom. Some Buddhists, including the one you are looking at, practice a form of meditation quite similar to gatekeeper practice. We call it mindfulness meditation. It is simply the practice of watching the thoughts and all other activities of the mind and noticing, number one, that you are not the thoughts. You are the watcher of the thoughts. Then pay attention to what motives the thoughts and feelings you experience and continuously monitor which thoughts are beneficial to you and others and encourage them. It would not be appropriate, not mindful, to encourage those thoughts and mental states that are harmful to yourself and others." So now finally Samana Dharma tells his joke story. Verse 553. Samana Dharma concluded his remarks by telling the following joke story. He said, "Patanjali has been teaching me to include humor in my lectures. She suggested that you all would enjoy the joke that I told her and Yogi Samadhi on our journey here." Yogi Samadhi jokingly intervened, saying, "What? She chose your joke over my fart joke?" Everyone laughed. Then Samana Dharma told his joke story. That's funny because my daughter got me a refrigerator magnet long ago that said I fart during yoga, and I never knew where that saying came from, but now I know. There's a lot of revelation in this one scroll of garden teachings of Joseph the Wizard. Okay, we're almost done. Thanks for hanging to the end, anyone who's still here. Samana Dharma said, "Behold, one morning 2 Buddhist monks were walking in the countryside begging alms. They came to a shallow, muddy creek that blocked the path. Lo, standing before the muddy creek was a young woman. She was afraid to cross the muddy creek. One of the 2 monks crossed the muddy creek without looking at the woman. But the other monk, seeing the woman's predicament, picked her up and carried her across the creek. He put her down on dry ground and then continued walking with the other monk. The monk who had not looked at the woman scolded the other, saying, 'We are celibate monks. It is not appropriate to carry a woman.'" Wow. So this story is a well-known story, a Zen story. It says that, so I'm still reading out of the Megillah. It says that he scolded him, saying, "We are celibate monks. It is not appropriate to carry a woman." That monk continued to scold the other throughout the day and into the evening. Finally, the scolded monk spoke, saying, "Brother, I quit carrying the woman this morning. You, though, are still carrying her." Everyone laughed at the true story. It was good to know that Samana Dharma was the monk in the story that had been berated for lifting the woman and helping her across the muddy creek. Yahshua asked him, "May I tell that story to others?" Samana Dharma smiled and replied, "I would be honored, young Yahshua." So, wow, right? That's the actual monk from the story that everybody knows. They call him Zen monk Tanzan. Okay, and let's see how theirs ended. The lady said, "Thank you very much, goodbye." They continued on their journey. Finally, the younger monk could not contain himself any longer and blurted out, "I thought we were monks and supposed to avoid women. Why did you just do that?" "Oh, you mean the woman way back there? I put her down long ago. Are you still carrying her?" Wow, Sadhguru gives his own little... I love this man too. The reason why people are struggling in their lives is that struggling in their lives is that they have not made an effort to understand the nature of their mind. One fundamentalistic aspect of the mind is when you say, I don't want that, then becomes the main content of your mind. If you take a vow, from now on, I will not think about monkeys, then the whole day you will only think about monkeys. This is how the mind works. It's so true. If you did not take such a vow, probably you would never think about monkeys unless you see them. That's so true, guys. And that's why I have this picture open. I wanted to show you, because this Samana Dharma was talking about Bhakti Yoga. Now see, I told you this symbolism, the monkey mind, is something where, like, if you were to say, oh, I vow not to think about monkeys, your ass would be thinking about monkeys all day, just because you said that. So we really need to be the watcher and the observer of the mind, and be in control of that by what we say out of our mouth, because we are told over and over again in this Holy Megillah that our reality and everything, even the bodies, everything we're in, is created by our thoughts, words, and deeds. And so we need to, like, really start looking deeper into these symbolisms. Bhakti Yoga, love, the heart and the mind, bringing them into balance, and how you have power over the mind is a heart. So yes, that was a beautiful Yahshua's teaching on the gatekeeper practice. When I took that yoga teacher training course, one of the first books, I'm not going to pull it up, we're just going to get out of here, but one of the books that was recommended for us to read was called Buddha's Brain. It's probably on Amazon, because I think that's where I ordered it from when I needed it. And it talks about the parasympathetic nervous system, and so it really tells you about when you experience trauma and how to get rid of some of these bad weeds that are in our mind. And now we got a little bit more teaching. So the mind works in many mysterious ways, because you wouldn't even want to be a part of a religion or organization or anything where it tells you that you can help a fellow person in need, you know. And so all these religious orders and these ascetic laws, if they stop you from loving your family members, shoot, if they stop you from loving animals and even insects, then you need to question them. Those are the thoughts and the ideas in your mind that are weeds that need to get pulled out. Anything that gets in the way of loving your neighbor. But hey, I'm telling you, do all you can. Alright guys, I'm gonna get on out of here. This is the longest video ever, but it was made on the longest day, the summer solstice. And just want to say we're here to stay. Alright, that just rhymed, but I'm gonna get out of here, guys. I love you. Thanks for being here, hanging with me all this time. Stay sweet, vibrate high. It's a new day. Yes, a new dawn. I couldn't find the off button. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.